In this edition of the Maryland Port Administration Dredged Material Management Program Spotlight Series, we'll explore which dredged material MPA is responsible for managing and how the area it comes from influences where we place it and how we manage it. In 1956, the Maryland Port Administration was established with a specific mission to stimulate the flow of waterborne commerce through the state of Maryland in a manner that benefits the citizens of the state. For nearly 70 years, MPA has fulfilled this mission by developing and supporting programs that grow the regional economy, making the Port of Baltimore one of the most important ports on the East Coast. The MPA Office of Navigation, Innovation, and Stewardship, or NIS, in partnership with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, is responsible for keeping the port's federal channels at their current depth and width by removing sediment, otherwise known as dredged material, that washes into the bottom of them. Making sure there is enough capacity to safely manage dredged material over a long period of time is a key function of NIS. This work is done through the Dredged Material Management Program, the DMMP, that was established by the 2001 Dredged Material Management Act. Through Maryland's Dredged Material Management Program, the Office of Navigation, Innovation, and Stewardship has developed a thorough process referred to as long-range capacity planning. This process identifies the need for dredging over the next 20 years and the available placement or reuse capacity for the resulting dredged material. The plan 1. Outlines the projected dredging needs. 2. Describes the available capacities of placement sites serving those channels. And 3. Identifies alternative measures to extend the life of existing placement sites. Material dredged from the Maryland Chesapeake Bay Approach Channel is placed in the same geography it came from. Matching dredging needs with placement site capacity takes into consideration engineering, science, federal and state budgets, legislative priorities, and community interests. So let's first talk about the number one dredging need. What channels need to be dredged, and how much material needs to be removed? Let's start with which channels need to be dredged. The Office of Navigation, Innovation, and Stewardship is required by law to ensure that federal shipping channels remain open for waterborne commerce. To keep the channels open and maintain the specific depths and widths needed for large cargo ships, maintenance dredging is necessary. This is because sediment naturally builds up in the channels due to wind and tidal action. Over time, and without maintenance dredging, the sediment builds up to make the channels too shallow for ships to safely navigate. To fulfill its mission, the Maryland Port Administration partners with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to maintain the 150 nautical miles of channels across 3 states, Virginia, Maryland, and Delaware. These channels serve as critical marine highways linking the port to the world. Taking a look at the map, the solid line is the 50-foot deep channel, the depth the largest modern ships need. The dotted line shows the northern approach channel that is maintained at a 35-foot depth, which meets the needs of many commercial vessels that access the port through Delaware Bay. You'll notice that the 50-foot channel starts in Virginia waters, continues through Maryland waters, and ends in Baltimore Harbor. The Baltimore Harbor Approach Channel system is divided into 4 major channel segments. You can see them color-coded here on the map. First, there are the Chesapeake Bay Approach Channels in Virginia. These are the channels from the Maryland-Virginia border to the ocean. They're in green on this map. Second, there are the Chesapeake Bay Approach Channels in Maryland. These are the channels outside the Baltimore Harbor, east and south to the Maryland and Virginia border. These are orange. Third are the Chesapeake and Delaware Canal and Approach Channels. These are the channels north of the Tolchester Channel to the Maryland-Delaware border. These are yellow. Fourth and final are the Baltimore Harbor Channels. These are the channels west of the North Point-Rock Point line established at the mouth of the Patapsco River. These are blue. Maintaining the shipping channels in the Chesapeake Bay, Baltimore Harbor, and the Chesapeake and Delaware Canal for massive ships is a huge job. Every year, nearly 5 million cubic yards of sediment are dredged from these channels just to maintain their current depths and widths. That's enough sediment to fill Ravens Stadium to the brim twice each year. Now that we know what channels need to be dredged, let's talk about how much material needs to be removed from each segment. Federal and state laws and regulations dictate where dredged material can be placed based on where the material is dredged from. Over 3/4, or 77%, of the total dredged material comes from outside the Baltimore Harbor. Baltimore Harbor makes up only 23%, as noted in blue. This video will focus on the two largest pieces of the pie chart: Baltimore Harbor channels, in blue, and the Maryland-Chesapeake Bay approach, in orange. As you can see on this graph, the Baltimore Harbor channels in blue is 23%, and the Maryland-Chesapeake Bay approach channels in orange is 44%. Over the next 20 years, more than 22 million cubic yards of dredged material needs to be removed from Baltimore Harbor channels. That would be enough to construct a highway from the Port of Baltimore to the Rocky Mountains, about 2/3 of the way across the country. Over 42 million cubic yards of dredged material needs to be removed from the Maryland-Chesapeake Bay approach channels. That would be enough to create a highway all the way to the Pacific Ocean. Material dredged from the Maryland-Chesapeake Bay approach channel is placed in the same geography it came from. Since 2001, the Maryland-Chesapeake Bay approach channel dredged material has been placed at the Paul S. Sarbanes Ecosystem Restoration Project at Poplar Island, commonly called Poplar Island. It is an international model. Here, MPA is restoring remote island habitat through the beneficial use of dredged material. The 1,715-acre site includes 68 million cubic yards of dredged material capacity. About 2 to 3 million cubic yards of material are dredged each year from the Maryland-Chesapeake Bay channel segment and placed at Poplar Island. You can see Poplar Island on the map. In about 10 years, Poplar Island will reach capacity. At that time, material dredged from the Maryland-Chesapeake Bay channel will be placed at the Mid-Chesapeake Bay Island Ecosystem Restoration Project, otherwise known as Mid-Bay. Mid-Bay is actually comprised of two islands, Barren Island and James Island. Once Mid-Bay is ready to receive dredged material, it will provide placement capacity for more than 30 years, until about 2065. Mid-Bay is critical to the 20-year rolling plan. Without Mid-Bay, sediment will accumulate in the Port of Baltimore's channel segments in the bay, and within 2 to 3 years, the channel depth will decrease to 45 feet, less than ships need to safely navigate in and out of the port. Now let's look at the Baltimore Harbor channels, the blue parts of the map. Just like the Maryland-Chesapeake Bay approach channels, material dredged from Baltimore Harbor channels must be placed in the same geography it came from, in this case, Baltimore Harbor. Baltimore Harbor channel material is defined by state law as material to the northwest or inside the North Point-Rock Point line, the dotted line you see on the map here. Also as mandated by law, the material from the channels within this line must be placed in a confined manner in this region. The source location of the dredged material is the only factor distinguishing Baltimore Harbor channel material from other bay channel material. When monitoring sediment quality, localized sediment quality tends to be similar on both sides of the North Point-Rock Point line. Remember that material from the channels within this line must be managed in a confined manner in this region. This will be important when we talk about placement capacity. The active placement sites that currently receive material dredged from the Baltimore Harbor channels are 1. The Masonville Dredged Material Containment Facility, or DMCF, and 2. The Cox Creek DMCF. Because the Baltimore Harbor area is densely populated, identifying new placement locations for Baltimore Harbor dredged material is challenging. Since we'll need to manage material indefinitely, we're working to stretch the life of these DMCFs in a few ways, like expanding them and reusing material that was placed there before in innovative ways, leaving more space for future placement. Currently, both of the Baltimore Harbor dredged material placement sites are undergoing expansion. So let's take a look at each of these facilities. At Masonville, raising the outer walls or dikes will increase the amount of sediment that can be placed there, and an additional 4 million cubic yards can fit in the facility. Looking at the Cox Creek DMCF, MPA raised the dikes to 60 feet and is currently exploring further expansion to a height of 80 feet, which will add an additional 6 million cubic yards to the facility. These construction projects will provide important placement capacity, but will eventually be filled. For the Baltimore Harbor sediment that will need to be placed after that time, MPA will need to secure additional capacity. MPA is exploring new ways to manage the dredged material. These new approaches will be explored in the next Spotlight series. We hope you've enjoyed learning about dredged material in Maryland and find the other Spotlight series presentations informative. The Maryland Port Administration will continue to work with regulators, community members, engineers, and scientists to implement science-based solutions for our 20-year dredged material management plan. If you would like additional information, you can find out more on our website, maryland-dmmp.com, or you can scan the QR code. On the website, you can learn more, download our fact sheet, and join our newsletter mailing list.